started. Okay, first, let's start off with a roll call. I'm going to go through each board member's name. If you could say you're here. Mr. Campbell Gooch. Chair Davis. Mr. Goddard.
I'm here.
Dr. Hildreth.
Present.
Mr. Holloway. Mr. Hughes. I'll try that again. Mr. Hughes. Dr. Lewis. Ms. Ross. Mr. Sweeney.
Present.
And Mr. Witzel.
Present.
Okay, I'm going to read the appeals statement.
Andres, I believe Timothy Hughes is online at this time.
I am here.
Okay, thanks, Timothy. Pursuant to the provisions of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of cert. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entitled considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. With the additional board members who have joined, I think we have quorum now. I'm going to count again.
I just want to say that Ms. Ross is trying to get in. She's having some difficulties.
Okay, so hold on. Okay, we do have quorum now. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Todd, who's going to give us an overview of the virtual meeting.
Okay, so just kind of some background on how we're holding an electronic meeting. Governor Lee declared a state of emergency back on March 12th, and then on March 20th implemented Executive Order 16, which did some of the in-person requirements for an Open Meetings Act. So that allowed boards to hold electronic meetings without a physical quorum until that executive order is lifted. So for the purpose of this board meeting, the board will vote on the record that the coronavirus pandemic requires it to hold a telephonic meeting as permitted under the governor's executive order number 16. So essentially what we need is for a board member to make a motion to that effect, basically stating that the meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak.
This is Matt. I so move.
Is there a second?
Drew, I second.
Thank you. I will do a roll call vote. Mr. Campbell Gooch. Chair Davis. Here. Mr. Goddard.
Aye.
Dr. Hildreth.
Aye.
Mr. Holloway. Mr. Hughes.
Aye.
Dr. Lewis. Ms. Ross. Mr. Sweeney.
Aye.
And Mr. Witzel.
Aye.
And an aye for me as well, so the motion passes. Now I will hand it off to Liz or Jill. I don't know if you wanted to take over before Liz did.
No, Liz can go ahead and start.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us virtually today. As you know, we're here to talk about the Policy Advisory Report examining local law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement actions. This is a dedicated board meeting. I'm going to start with my presentation, and then there will be time for discussions and questions before the board decides to vote. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll jump right in. So after reviewing feedback, we were asked to split up the original report into multiple parts. So as you should have seen, the report now is shorter than the original. This first report only includes 4 of the original recommendations and focuses more on the original proposal that was submitted to the board by Board Member Martinez, and some of the more open-ended topics from the original report are going to be moved into a later policy advisory report. And we're currently working on that internally on the creation of the proposal for this second policy advisory report. Next slide. Just to review, I want to thank everyone who came to the public meeting for this report on January 9th, and everyone who sent in written comments via email. We received a lot of positive feedback and support from community members and organizations. This slide shows some of the more relevant feedback that we received that still pertains to the current version of the report and the 4 recommendations that are included. The first point was feedback or questions about the timeline of implementation by the MMPD. There is no definitive timeline for a response from the MMPD to these policy recommendations if they are approved. As per the Memorandum of Understanding between the COB and the MMPD, leadership at the MMPD must respond to our policy recommendations within a reasonable amount of time. Other agencies that are mentioned in the report, such as the Department of Emergency Communications, are not currently required to respond to recommendations made by the COB. The second point was translation of our reports into other languages. We really appreciate the importance of making our research more widely available to the local community. We're going to work internally on the feasibility of translating the final versions of our policy advisory reports. And we'll also be discussing how we can better prepare to engage the community at the public comment stage of our future research reports. The final point was making the report inclusive of all immigrants and clarifying sensitive language. So we made some changes to some of the language in the report just to make sure that we were more inclusive of everyone and that we weren't perpetuating any unjust narratives regarding immigration in general. Next slide. So the policy advisory report request that we received tasked us with examining 3 main things and proposing policies for the MMPD. The first was any and all policies MMPD has relating to interaction with federal immigration enforcement officers and federal immigration enforcement actions. The second was any training MMPD personnel receives regarding federal immigration enforcement, including jurisdiction, types of warrants, identity documents, and civil rights. And the third was the number of times that ICE agents have requested assistance from MMPD in any way, the outcome of such requests, and the amount of Metro resources expended on such requests. So to develop this report, given these tasks, we reviewed media reports on immigration enforcement in Nashville, academic research on local police and immigration enforcement, the MMPD policy manual, and we also requested information on training, incident and CAD reports for all the instances where MMPD officers responded to a call from ICE. And we also interviewed community leaders and members who work with and advocate for immigrants and refugee communities. This report, as it is now, has 3 sections. First, we review relevant immigration policies in Nashville, Tennessee, and at the federal level. Second, we discuss our findings on MMPD policies, trainings, and procedures relating to immigration enforcement actions within Davidson County. And third, we make recommendations for improving MMPD policies, procedures, and trainings related to immigration enforcement. And we also use examples of actions that have been taken by other cities. Next slide. This you've seen before. This was created to help describe Nashville's deportation pipeline, as some would call it. Although the MMPD states that they do not engage in immigration enforcement, they do play a role in deciding who will be issued a citation and who will be arrested and then transferred to the sheriff's office for booking. This decision is one that is left to individual officer discretion for misdemeanor crimes. In addition, in that first column, you'll see that the place of birth field on MMPD forms was used under the 287G program. And the place of birth field was used then by sheriff's office personnel in booking to flag people for immigration questioning. And we've also heard some concerns in our current interviews, even though 287G is no longer active, that officers are using a place of birth field as a segue to ask community members about their immigration status. If you look at the middle column, at the sheriff's office, once someone is booked at DCSO, their information and fingerprints are sent to the federal government, which includes ICE. And ICE can then use this information to issue detainers to DCSO for the continued custody of an individual who is in jail. The last column, ICE are also using this information to issue detainers and making regular trips to DCSO to pick people up who DCSO has agreed to hold for them. Next slide. So upon requesting records from the Department of Emergency Communication and MMPD related to calls from ICE for assistance, both departments stated that they did not keep track of such instances in their records. As a result, MCO was only able to request information related to 3 high-profile incidents that took place last year in 2019. Before I give a brief overview of these 3 high-profile incidents, I wanted to explain to the board that we were not able to determine dollar amounts for the Metro resources spent responding to ICE calls for service. However, we do have information on how many officers responded to the calls and what times they were dispatched at. The first major incident was on July 22nd, 2019, when ICE officers attempted to pull over a man and his 12-year-old son who were in a van. The man pulled the van into a residential driveway where he and his son would spend more than 4 hours inside the vehicle while ICE agents tried to talk them into exiting. During this incident, one of the ICE agents called for assistance from the MMPD. According to the MMPD CAD report, a total of 5 officers responded to the scene, arriving between 7:22 a.m. and 9:49 a.m. The second incident was on September 5th, 2019, in the parking lot of a Food Lion supermarket in Antioch. A federal immigration agent fired shots into a box truck and injured a man that had exercised his right to refuse to show ID without a judicial warrant. An ICE agent called the MMPD to the scene just after 7 o'clock in the morning and informed the department that he had fired his weapon while attempting an apprehension. MMPD was not involved in the investigation of this incident except for protecting the scene until the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security could take over and begin their own investigations. The final incident that we were able to gain information for was on the morning of December 5th, 2019. MMPD was called to respond to the scene of an ICE arrest at which ICE agents had pepper sprayed 3 family members of the man they were arresting, including 2 women and a minor. According to the MMPD CAD report, a total of 9 MMPD officers responded to the scene within a few minutes of each other. An ambulance from the Nashville Fire Department was also called to the scene to provide medical assistance to the family members who had been pepper sprayed by ICE agents. Supplemental reports made by the MMPD officers who were at the scene indicate that officers stood between the ICE agents and the crowd of residents that had formed in an effort to de-escalate the situation, and that they had also helped physically remove a family member from blocking the road in front of an ICE vehicle. Next slide, please. Before I jump into the recommendations, I wanted to highlight this slide on legal review. We had our in-house counsel review the report and recommendations for any legal concerns. And so there was a new statement added to the report, basically saying that these policy recommendations are in no way designed to prevent or limit local law enforcement officers' ability to perform their duties required of them under the law, nor would they be in violation of Tennessee Code annotated 7-68-102, which is also known as HB 2315. Instead, these recommendations are designed to address areas where training may be improved to enhance relationships between the MMPD and immigrant communities, and to encourage the reporting and tracking of any Metro resources used to provide assistance to ICE and the federal government within Davidson County. Next slide. So now jumping into recommendation number 1, this is 1 of 4 total. The first recommendation is that MMPD should create and implement policies and formal training on what types of US issued and foreign issued identification will be accepted in order to issue misdemeanor citations rather than take individuals into physical custody. The MMPD should eliminate the ambiguity that exists within their policies by expanding the types of identification that are officially accepted and issue misdemeanor citations whenever possible, as directed by Tennessee Code 40-7-118. If the MMPD does not formally adopt the acceptance of alternate forms of identification, it will continue to contribute to the insecurity of residents who cannot secure state-issued identity documents and leave residents at the mercy and discretion of individual officers. Solidifying additionally accepted forms of identification in the MMPD policy would help to build trust with the immigrant community and allay some of the fears related to police interaction. Next slide. Recommendation number 2 is that the MMPD should create and implement policies that discourage police officers from asking about immigration or citizenship status. If an officer does ask about immigration status or citizenship status, they should be required to document that they asked and provide a justification for the question in their report narratives. A frequently asked questions document that was distributed to MMPD officers kind of displays the complicated relationship between policy and practice when it comes to questions regarding immigration status. This was highlighted in Appendix D in response to one of the frequently asked questions, which was, what's MMPD's policy as it relates to interactions with immigrants? The MMPD's official answer is, quote, immigration status is not a relevant consideration in virtually all interactions with immigrants. The MMPD has no reason to inquire or otherwise consider immigration status in the performance of our duties, end quote. The MMPD has expressed publicly that they do not get involved in immigration enforcement. However, MNCO has heard from community members that MMPD officers are inquiring about immigration status and have done so more often since the passing of HB 2315. Since MMPD has no immigration enforcement authority, this question really serves no practical purpose and instead spreads fear and a sense of alienation amongst the immigrant community in Nashville. Next slide. Recommendation number 3, the MMPD should create and implement training on the difference between administrative and judicial warrants and what ICE can and cannot do while conducting immigration enforcement in public compared to reasonable expectation of privacy areas. The MMPD staff should be trained on the difference between these two types of warrants. ICE warrants do not provide a basis for local law enforcement officers to arrest or detain an individual since they have not been reviewed by a judge and they are for civil immigration arrests. These administrative ICE warrants do not satisfy the requirements of the Fourth Amendment, and thus a detainment by local law enforcement based on an ICE warrant may violate the Fourth Amendment and could constitute false imprisonment under state laws. So it's important that local law enforcement officials understand the difference and know how to identify each type of warrant, especially if MMPD officers are responding to calls to assist federal immigration enforcement officials. It is recommended that this distinction between the two types of warrants be made in the MMPD policy manual. Other police departments in the country, such as the Metropolitan Police in DC, have clearly indicated in their policies that officers shall not make arrests based solely on administrative warrants, whether they appear in the National Crime Information Center NCIC database or presented in person by ICE agents asking for assistance with the arrest or transport of an individual. The San Francisco Police Department also has a section of their policy manual on enforcement of immigration laws that serves as a comprehensive guide on the boundaries surrounding local law enforcement's involvement in federal immigration enforcement and also provides useful definitions for the officers. Next slide. So this is the 4th and final recommendation in this report. The Department of Emergency Communications and the Metro Nashville Police Department should document and track instances of federal immigration enforcement officials calling for MMPD or first responder assistance during their enforcement actions in Davidson County. Given high-profile events that have taken place in Nashville involving the federal immigration enforcement officials and Metro government first responders, DEC and MMPD should better document incidents in which federal agencies call for law enforcement assistance. By keeping these records that accurately capture these instances, Metro government officials can better assess the impacts that these calls are having on the community, as well as keep track of the Metro government resources that are expended responding to such requests. Next slide. So in conclusion, MNCO found that there was a lack of official MMPD policies and trainings related to federal immigration enforcement and immigrant rights in Nashville and Davidson County. Although the MMPD states that it is not involved in immigration enforcement, actions that they take can impact who has contact with the immigration enforcement system and how immigration enforcement officials carry out their operations locally. Given our city's diverse population, MNCO believes that there are changes to local law enforcement policy, practice, and training that can be made in order to better serve and protect our diverse community. And that is the last slide of my presentation. I will open the floor up now for discussion, maybe led by Andres, I think.
Chair Davis is back on, but I think we should open it up to discussion and questions from board members.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. I think there's a feature at the bottom right hand there where you can raise your hand and we'll be able to see it. Andres, I see your hand. Is that your hand raised or are you trying not to feature?
That's me. Just to get clarification on the process of approving each of the policy recommendations, we will consider and vote on each one separately. Is that correct?
That was my understanding. Director Fitchard and or Liz, any difference there? Or would you like for us to considering totality and then amend where necessary?
I believe in the policy promulgation meetings, we were discussing potentially voting on the report as a whole. And then if there were hangups about certain recommendations, then we could separate them out into individual recommendations and vote on each one individually. But someone correct me if that is not what we officially landed on.
Okay. Seems like the cleanest way to do it. Go ahead. I've got someone else.
This is Matt. Yeah, that was what we set forth, that we can consider the report and each of the recommendations as a whole, subject to any board member asking that we make separate consideration of either the individual recommendations or some part of the report.
Okay, thank you. Before I move to the next person, Andres, with that in mind, do you have something you want to point out, one of the recommendations in particular, and then we can talk about that one or get answers?
No, I just wanted to clarify that for the board, if they didn't know that that was the process.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell-Gooch?
Hi, everybody. I have a two-part question. My first part of a question is were there any gaps in the research? Like, was there anything you wanted to research, but just literally were restricted by something that we did, or just where were the gaps, if any?
So I'll start with that first question. I don't feel like we were restricted by the board. I do think it was a good move to kind of split the report up. I think there was a lot of different topics that came up in our interviews with community members. But I think that it was smart to have this version of the report that really stuck to the original proposal that was put forward to the board, and have the time and space to explore some of the other topics that came up that are important, but maybe don't have the same level of urgency as some of these enforcement issues that are going on.
Okay, and then my next question, you kind of were going that direction, is what would be a part two to this, or where would you go from here, if you could research anything?
So I think part two is in the works internally right now. We're working on a proposal for the next report related to some of the other recommendations that were in the original report, because some of them I felt or we felt were very important. And that will definitely be more focused on interactions between community members and law enforcement officials, and how we can work on some of the communication and language and outreach barriers that may exist right now.
Any other members of the board with questions or points they want to raise as it relates to the policy recommendation? Mr. Goddard?
Yes, I'm going to sound like a lawyer. I apologize. I've got a few language questions. Liz, the first one on the actual report itself, page 4, and this is a question of complete ignorance. We talk about, in that first paragraph, talk about where the immigrant community in Nashville is born. And one phrase says 2% born in North America. Does North America there in the immigration context clearly, but I'm ignorant to refer, exclude Mexico, or do we need to say other born elsewhere in North America?
That's a good point of clarification, because I would say Mexico is included in Latin America. I would say North America probably includes Canada in that distinction.
Sure, okay. All right, well, if you think it makes sense to say born elsewhere in North America, just leave it. Time's easy, just wanted to raise that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Second, on page 5, the third paragraph, we have driving related offenses, i.e. driving without a license. Is that the only one, or should that be e.g.? For example, driving without a license.
I would say that should be e.g. driving without a license, but I won't say I am well versed in all the different types of driving misdemeanors.
Okay.
But I think that would make sense to change that. I'll make a
All
note
right.
for that.
All right. Just got a few more. Bottom part of page 7. It's actually the Mayor Cooper's Immigration Task Force. This refers generally, and the footnote refers to the draft report. There was a final report with slightly different language in the bullet points that they recommended, the bulleted things there. I think it would make sense to refer to the final report and update that language. It doesn't change the substance of it at all, but just to get the reference to the current report, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. I did not catch that as this was written before they issued their final version of their recommendations. They were still in the draft phase.
These are not criticism, just suggestions.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Page 9, the first paragraph under identification.
Yes.
The last sentence says these documents, use of these documents seems to be at the discretion of individual officers. I think that's true. It is at the discretion of individual officers. There is some guidance for them or language gives them some, just a bit more meat on the skeleton there. On what page is it? Page 493 of the report we're referring to. That's right, it's footnoted there. I think, just to be fair, to say something, I don't have the exact language, I'm sorry, but something to the effect of, while some guidance is provided, ultimately it's at the discretion of the individual officer, something like that, if that's how you read it as well.
Okay. Yeah, I know that there is some guidance listed depending on the situation. That can be reworded.
Okay. Just 2 more quickly. Top of page 11, second line, you've asked for reports and activity logs for the police department. The next sentence says its request was denied by the police, citing they don't exist. I think maybe rather than denied, this request was not able to be fulfilled or something to that effect. Just not having it is a denial, at least as I understand, and maybe overly legally. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Not exactly, because I wasn't making totally good sense.
No, it's fine. I just lost you for a second.
If you ask somebody something and they say we don't have it, I don't view that as a denial. I think it's they can't provide what you asked, but it's not because they're refusing to give it to you. It's because they don't have it.
Okay.
I was trying to come up with some language that stated that clearly. Not able to be fulfilled or something to that effect.
Sure.
And lastly, page 13, last section is discussion of identification. Says the MNPD should eliminate the ambiguity that exists in their policies by expanding the types. I think I would say by expanding and specifying the types of identification. I think we both need more identification and as great a clarity as possible so the individual officers are comfortable using the alternate identification, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. That does make sense.
I thank you and the other board members for your time listening to all that. And let me stop. I shouldn't, as one board member, be able to make changes. If any other board members have any questions, concerns, or objections, anything I just suggested, please speak up.
Thank you. I think that's great. Anyone else? Liz, anything else you think we should highlight or be aware of as we post before the board? There's an opportunity for a motion here.
No, I think that I've covered anything that I needed to. If anyone else has any clarifying questions or anything like that, I'm totally open.
Okay. With that, is there a motion? And I would, of course, want us, if there's no objections, to take into consideration the points and raised by the board members here in the discussion here. Is there a motion here, though?
This is Matt. I would move that the policy proposal, including the 4 recommendations, be approved by the board with the language revisions as discussed between Mr. Goddard and Ms. Orozco.
I would second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Who's that? Is that Mr. Hughes?
That would be Timothy Hughes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. With that, any focused discussion? Looking at the hands raised, if there is. Okay. If not here, then let's do a roll call vote here on the motion, and I will just go about it in the order of how we're listed here on the website here. Or actually, if you all don't mind, I'm going to actually go in order of how I see folks listed in the WebEx here. So with that, Mr. Martinez.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Goddard.
Yes.
Mr. Goddard.
I'm sorry. Yes, I thought I was unmuted.
No problem. Mr. Campbell Gooch.
Yes.
Thank you. I have Mr. Sweeney.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Hildreth.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes.
Yes.
Thank you. And as chair, I vote aye as well. Am I missing anyone? That's all that I see and hear as board members for myself.
Did you call Mr. Witzel?
I don't think I did. Apologies. Mr. Witzel?
Yes.
Thank you. That is 8. I have 8 board members voting. I'm sure someone else is keeping a count there. Is that what anyone else can verify?
Yes. That's Matt. Yes.
Thank you. With that, the motion passes. Thank you very much. That is our only agenda item today. We do have listed here if there's any announcements, anything pressing or important that any of the board members want to share before we adjourn. Dr. Hildreth?
Thank you. I had raised my hand earlier. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Verosco, the staff, also the committee that came together and collaboratively contributed to a result that I think met our concerns as a board to ensure that we could hear and understand and digest the issues clearly, that gave our community an opportunity to be co-participants in that process, and then brought us to this point, probably one of the ultimate tests that, given the difficulties of transacting this business electronically, not being present with each other, I found it easy to review the materials that were prepared and then come participate. So I am deeply grateful to the team for making that process possible, and I am doubly grateful for the great result that obtained. So thank you.
Thank you, Hildreth, and you certainly speak for the board on that, without a doubt. Director Fisher? I don't know if you were you unmuting? Do you have anything you want to share?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for those words. It has been a tremendous time trying to get the report together, and I think that Liz and Peter, and they did an excellent job. I did want to remind the board members that there is an executive committee meeting, and that meeting is on Friday at 1:30.
Okay. Can you say that?
If it, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can you just say that one more time? It was choppy on my end. Sorry, it's probably my fault.
Yes, sorry. We have a board meeting. I'm sorry, an executive team meeting. That meeting is going to be on Friday, April the 17th from 1 to 2 p.m. And so we will have invites, those will be sent out today. And we'll also have invites sent out for the board meeting on April the 22nd. And that meeting on April the 22nd is from 3 to 5 p.m.
Okay. Thank you. All right. If there is nothing else, we have the details for our next meeting. We'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved. This is Andres.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. And 1 second.
Seconded.
Was that Mr. Hughes?
It is indeed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. With that, any focused discussion? Not all those in favor. I'm going to take is it okay, Mr. Pinkley, for me to just take an aye on this one?
I think so. I don't imagine anyone's going to oppose.
Okay. All those in favor, please unmute and say aye.
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 Okay. Nay. Abstentions. Okay. The motion carries. Thank you very much. We are adjourned at 2:14. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.